When we talk about denial, deceit, and delusion among reporters and public officials and other people, when it comes to talking about black violence and criminality wildly out of proportion, it's amazing to me how easy it is to find it and how often we find it. Just the other day, I was listening to NPR, and a woman by the name of Stacey Patton wrote a book about how black people spank their kids and they ought to stop it. And during the interview, she was very explicit about it. It's like, hey, this happened to me. This is happening all over the damn place. Overwhelming majority of black people spank their kids. In translation of today's terms, that means there's overwhelming amount of child abuse. Okay, so fine. So I was listening to it, and I was actually empathizing a little bit with her experience, or at least sympathizing with it, because she was the direct victim of this stuff when she was a kid. Lots and lots of beatings. And when the beatings were done, or before they began, her adopted mother would sit down and tell her, said, listen, we have to beat you like this, because if we don't, someday you're going to get in trouble with the cops and they're going to kill you. And so that went on for a while, and that was strange enough, to tell the truth about that. But then about halfway through the interview, she started talking about, well, you know, she started talking about black child abuse again, and she said, well, we don't have any evidence that this ever existed in Africa. Well, if the evidence existed in Africa of what life was like there in 1600, 1650, 1700, where would it be? In one of the many thousands of libraries that dot the African landscape? What a cop-out. And she went on from there to say, that's why she believes that the tradition of spanking and child abuse came directly from white people. White people are responsible for black child abuse today. So flash forward over to the Huffington Post today. Headline, The Quiet Crisis Killing Black Woman. And this is an article, not the first time anybody's ever written about this. Talks about how widespread domestic abuse is, wife beating is among black people, in the black community. The article goes on to talk about black women facing higher rates of domestic violence than do women of all other races except Native Americans. Blah, blah, blah. Black women are, this is kind of buried down the article. I had to pull it up here. Black women are 4 times more likely than their white peers to be murdered by a boyfriend or girlfriend, and twice as likely to be killed by a spouse, 7 times more likely to be killed while pregnant than white women. Wow. Of course, if you're writing for the Huffington Post, you do not document black dysfunction without getting in there and explaining it away before, during, and after what you have written. Experts say this is not because black men are more violent, rather black women are more vulnerable to domestic violence due to a constellation of factors: poverty, lack of access to resources, and systematic racism. Wow, it's always there, isn't it? But here's one thing they get into that we've gotten into before, and we're going to get into again in a minute, about why women do not report domestic violence and sexual abuse. Why black women do not report. While victims of all races experience shame about domestic violence, there is a deep culture of silence in black communities, said Zoe Flowers. One women is that many black women are socialized from a young age to believe they must be all strong at all times. There's also a general attitude that women should stand by their partners no matter what. Why? Because the world is hard on black men. The legal system incarcerates 5 times more black people than whites. Quote, people already feel like black men are more violent, that black women are loud. All these stereotypes. You don't want to open your community up for more scrutiny. It's not uncommon for black victims of domestic violence to recuse themselves from the criminal justice system, said Beth Ritchie, professor of African American Studies, University of Illinois, Chicago. There is a feeling in black communities that the only time violence against a black woman is taken seriously is when it can be used to feed the arrest and detention of a black man. Wow, there's all these excuses for the violence against women in the black community. Sorry about the scratchy audio on this. I think this little segment will be better. But anyway, let's get back to my favorite quote from the whole article from the Huffington Post website, reproduced on Yahoo and lots of other places. Now, we do a lot of stuff on black violence, denial, lots and lots of stuff on excuses here. Tell me if you ever heard this before or if you knew this. This comes from the aforementioned Professor Flowers. Quote, "Many black women are also taught to protect the race at all cost," she said. That means victims of domestic violence may stay quiet to shield their communities from additional negative attention. Wow. I mean, you could do nothing else on this topic. Just keep rereading that one sentence over and over and over and over. It is very rare we see so much truth packed in to two little sentences. That's it right there. Excuse, excuse, excuse. Violence, violence, violence. And everybody's just willing to look at it and go, well, yeah, you know what? There's a problem. We have a problem with reporting people because if they report the guy who beat that woman up, he might go to jail. We know what will happen there. He'll go away for a long time. We can't turn violent criminals over to jail because cops might treat them like violent criminals. And besides, why would we turn that criminal over to the cops when he's not really the criminal? He's really a victim of white racism. That is what they say in sympathetic accounts of domestic violence. Right in the Huffington Post. People that have been reading my books and watching these videos for a while, you must have remembered the one early story we did about this. Anybody remember Melissa Harris Perry? How she wanted to be a big deal. And MSNBC said, no, you're only a medium deal. So they sent her packing back to her college professorship. Well, she had a show once where she had a professor on the show from Harvard, a professor of religion, a woman of an Arabic woman. And she had another woman on a show who had just written an article for Foreign Policy magazine about how they treat women in the Muslim world. And it was just one horror story after another. And Melissa Harris Perry said, yeah, listen. Well, let's just hear what she said.
So I start with a little bit of trepidation in this conversation, in part because I know that some of the critiques of this is the very idea that Western press, that those who are not from these nations, who are not Muslim ourselves, who are not part of these traditions, can look at your article and say, ugh, look at how horrible those men or those societies or that religion is. And it's something, it's part of why, for example, we have an underreporting of rape and domestic violence in African American communities, because we know the violence enacted on black men by police, so we often don't call.
And all the while, that professor from Harvard is shaking her head going, yeah, that's right. Let's not report violence against black people, black women. Let's not report rape against black women because those rapists might actually go to jail. Sometimes words fail me around here when I try to get my mind around the level of insanity and depravity that would allow someone to say, yeah, well, we'll let that rapist slide because we don't want that gentle little delicate angel to be harassed by the racist white police. How sick do you have to be to think that and say it and expect somebody to believe it? I think we did this and Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, but there's more than one article about this. An article that talks about how in black colleges, one of our article reports a study that says 60 to 65% of black women in college have been raped before they get to college. And another article says 95% of these rapes are not reported. And this was a sympathetic article about black women on getting raped on college campuses, especially at black colleges. Because when that happens there, a lot of women are reporting the same story. And all of a sudden, one of the elders comes around, maybe a professor, maybe a minister, sits the woman down, explains to her that Antoine or whoever raped her is really a nice guy, that he just, these things happen with guys, and we don't want to report him for this crime because that giving him a record will ruin his life. Lots and lots of pressure on these victims of rape in college not to report black rapists.
Please, sir, I want some more.
And on it goes. We talk about denial, deceit, delusion. We talk about these crime numbers that are meaningless because of the culture of non-reporting that exists among black people. Just two more examples. Rape and domestic violence. Stitches for snitches. That's what this is a version of. Witness intimidation. And yet on it goes. The Huffington Post. Other women's magazines are just shrugging their shoulders at this incredible level of violence against black women coming from black men, and they look at it and go, hey, it's a black thing. We white people don't understand it, and we don't have any right to judge it. Because doing that makes the black kids angry.